Are you ready to start your garden this year? Well, you're in luck because today's lesson, Growing Onions 101, is going to be a step-by-step guide on how you can start your own onions at home from seed. I'm Brittany DeMezier, one of the Food Systems Program Coordinators here at the Iowa State University Extension and Outreach Office in Dubuque County, and today we're going to talk about starting onions at home. Onions are one of the first things that you can start indoors at home before the growing season starts. So to get started, we're going to walk step by step on how to start these onions from seed, what to do once they've sprouted, and then we're going to talk about different uses for the different types of onions that you see out there. So without further ado, let's get started. So there's several different types of onions, and if you're watching this video, it's likely that you probably got one of these Growing Onions 101 packets in the mail. So inside this packet, we're going to open it up and we'll find our growing guide, which will give you a quick overview of what you're going to find in this packet. You're going to find our onion starting guide from Iowa State Extension, and if you aren't part of the Onions 101 program, you can also find this online at our ISU Extension store. Go ahead and just search the term onions and this publication should come up for you. You'll also find a quick guide to onions to talk about the different types of onions we're going to cover here today, as well as a quick cooking, storage, and cleaning guide for your onions. If you got the packet from our office, you'll also have two seed packets included. One is a storage onion, Walla Walla, and the other are green onions, which are typically used fresh. And we're going to talk about those differences here right now. So there's several different types of onions that you'll find as you're either browsing through your garden catalog or shopping in the grocery store. The most common type of onion that you're going to see is the yellow onion. This onion is probably one of the most versatile. It's the all-purpose onion. So if your recipe is calling for onions, this is most likely what you're going to pick up. The onions that we're growing in this program, the Walla Walla onions, are a yellow sweet onion. So they are yellow, but they do not store as long as some yellow onions do. Typically, yellow onions can last quite a few months after harvest. But the ones that we're growing today have a little bit shorter storage life than some others out there on the market. Something like a candy or a copra might give you a little longer storage than the Walla Wallas that we're going to grow from seed today. Another onion that you might see in the grocery store are red onions. So red onions here, typically the variety that you're going to see grown in Iowa is going to be the red Zeppelin. So there's other varieties that you can find on this pack or on this growing guide as well. They're right here on the back of this chart. But the red Zeppelin is probably the most common. Red onions are typically pungent. They give you that really strong onion flavor, and they give you your dish a nice red color to it as well. One of the shortest storage onions that you'll find out there are the white onions. So I haven't seen a very long storing white onion. So if you're getting these, it's going to be a little bit softer, it's going to be a little bit milder, and it's going to be a little bit more thin and papery once you cut into it. So if you're interested in growing these at home, these do not store as well as some of your other varieties. So I would use these first before these other two.
One thing to keep in mind when growing any of these onions is their day length requirement. Onions form bulbs, and their size is dependent upon the day length and temperature in the environment that they're in. In Iowa, onions grow best here that are classified as long day onions, since our summer days are anywhere between 14 to 16 hours in length. Short day onions have a shorter day length requirement of anywhere between 10 to 12 hours, and of course, intermediate day onions fall somewhere in the middle. You'll want to make sure when you're choosing an onion that you're choosing a long day variety for growing in Iowa.
The other two types of onions that we're going to talk about don't have a day length requirement. The first one are green onions. Green onions are best used fresh. Typically what will happen is you'll cut off these root parts on the bottom, and then you'll thinly slice this white part probably up into this till it starts to turn a little bit darker green in here. This produces a very mild, gentle flavor that you can use when sauteing vegetables or meats, making sauces and those types of things, that gives it just kind of a light, mild onion flavor. The last one that we're going to talk about are shallots. Shallots are very similar to garlic in that they grow in kind of bunches or groups. So here, this one I'm gonna actually take the papery skin off of this one, and you'll see how it is kind of separated into two little pieces. So we can pull these two apart and use each individual shallot in our dish. You can use them one-to-one where you'd use onions. They're gonna just be a little bit more mild in flavor to give the essence of onion without maybe having such a pungent taste to it like you would get with like a red or a yellow onion. So now it's time to start planting our seeds. So as I mentioned before, we've got two different varieties in your packet today. We're gonna grow green onions or bunching onions those are this kind that you will find in the store. We're also going to grow a traditional bulb onion called the Walla Walla. That is a yellow sweet onion, as we talked about earlier. So there's three different ways that you can grow onions. Today we're gonna start ours from seed, but you're probably more familiar with starting your onions from sets, which are small immature onions that have had their life cycle interrupted, and basically you plant those small starts in the ground and it gives you a jump start in the season. So if that's what you're used to, typically you're not used to seeing a variety on that onion. So the advantage of planting your onions from seed is you can kind of tailor the variety that you're looking for to what you're actually growing in your garden, versus sets are only limited to about one or two varieties, and you may not even know what varieties those are when you're planting them in your garden. Another way that you can start onions is from individual starts. So you'll get a small bundle of onions, but the onions are going to be quite a bit smaller from either your garden center or from a mail order catalog. And then you'll plant these starts in the ground as well. You can grow onions from other onions. We're not going to talk about that today, but those are the three different types of ways that you can grow onions in your garden: from seed, from sets, and from starts. So I'm going to get started seeding these cells down. What I'm going to use today is a traditional seed starting mix. So as you are starting these seeds, I would recommend using a seed starting mix versus potting soil or some of the other types of things that you might find in a garden center or a box store. The seed starting mix is going to be optimized to getting you the best seed to soil contact, which is going to help your germination rate improve. So it's also going to have great water holding capacity. This is a little bit finer textured than some potting soils that you might find. So we're going to just fill this up with this seed starting mix. So this is going to be ideal for getting these seeds started. And as you can see, it's pretty dry, so it is kind of coming out the bottom. So we're going to go ahead and fill our 6-pack up. We're going to shake it a little bit, and then we're going to tamp it down to get some of that excess. And there isn't a lot of settling going on, but we are going to fill it up all the way with that seed starting mix. Go ahead, shake it, tamp it down a little bit. And now at this point, what I like to do is go ahead and fill this flat up with water and let that soil go ahead and absorb that water up into the cells so that they are nice and moist and we don't have to worry about watering them from the top to start. If you're impatient and don't want to wait for that process, it usually takes about 2 hours. But if you're impatient, you can go ahead and start them this way, and I'll show you how to water them so that you don't have seeds bubbling out of the top of your new freshly potted onion starts. So there's 3 different types of ways that you can start your onion seeds. No way is better than the other, but I'm going to show you all 3 ways today just so you can get an idea on how you can plant these, and then you can choose your own method that's most comfortable to you. So the first way that we're going to start is just by filling up our flat and then go ahead and taking a blunt object, either a pencil eraser or something like that, and go ahead and making a small indent in that soil. So your finished product is going to look a little bit like this. You can just see a small indent in there. And then you can go ahead and take your onion seeds. So we'll take those onion seeds and we'll go ahead and plant 1 to 2 in these little cells. And then go ahead and cover them up. And there you go. So if you haven't watered your soil from the bottom and kind of let that water absorb up into there, what I would recommend doing is at this point going ahead and spraying the top with water. That way your seeds don't bubble up as you're watering those plants for the first time. So go ahead and let that sit for a little bit, and then you can come back in a little while and go ahead and finish watering them, or you can fill up this and let it soak up that water from the bottom, and that will also keep your seeds watered. So the next way that we are going to plant these seeds is we're going to go ahead, just like before, and go ahead and fill up our 6-pack with that seed starting mix. Just like before, go ahead and shake off the excess, tamp it down a little bit, let that settle out. I shook this one a little bit more because we're gonna need a little bit more space in the top of this 6-pack in order to do this technique. But basically what you'll do is go ahead and take your onion seeds, go ahead and dump them out in your hand like that, and then we will go ahead and just set those seeds right on top of the soil. Again, 1 to 3 per cell. And then you can go ahead and just press them in with your finger. Or the third way is going to be to take some additional soil and just sprinkle it on top of those already existing seeds. This method works best if you have used the watering from the bottom strategy to get some of this potting mixture moistened up, and then going ahead and using that spray bottle to spray it from the top again to get those seeds nice and wet so that they're ready to start growing. So once you've planted your seeds in the seed starting mix, I would go ahead and recommend covering them up with a small plastic dome to keep that humidity and water inside of your growing system. So once the seeds start to sprout up, which should be in about 7 to 10 days after you plant them, you can go ahead and take that clear cover off, and then you'll start to see your seeds grow from there. Again, I would recommend watering your starts from the bottom so that the roots can continue to grow down into that water, and look for water from the bottom versus from the top. So these starts have been growing for about 3 weeks, and you can see they've gotten pretty tall. At this point, they've reached about 5 inches in height. So you can see here on my ruler, they're about 5. This one's almost 6 inches tall. And once they get growing, you'll want to go ahead and trim them back a little bit. So I would trim them to about 3 to 4 inches just to keep them nice and uniform so that they can get thicker instead of trying to grow upwards. Another really important thing to keep in mind when you're growing onions is to make sure that the day length, it does not exceed 8 to 10 hours a day. Otherwise, the plant is going to put energy into forming a bulb, and we just don't want that before we start putting them outside. So making sure that that day length is anywhere from 8 to 10 hours a day, and then go ahead and trim them back and keep trimming them back until it's time to plant them outside, which is usually sometime mid to late April. Onions do take a long time to grow, so starting them inside this early is going to be helpful as you're going ahead and transplanting them outside. By the time they're ready to transplant, they'll be a little thinner than the thickness of a traditional number 2 pencil. And what you're going to want to do is go ahead and take them out of these cells, separate any plants that might be growing together. Remember, we put 1 to 3 seeds in each cell. So if all 3 of those seeds sprouted, you'll want to go ahead and separate those 3 onions apart and plant them individually. If you're growing green onions, you're going to want to keep your spacing to about 1 inch apart. If you're growing bulbing onions, you're gonna wanna keep that spacing to about 3 to 4 inches. If we take a look at our onion from before, this onion is about 4 inches in diameter. So you wanna go ahead and give that onion space to go ahead and grow and not be competing with the onion next to it.
So you'll know your onions are ready to harvest when the tops start to turn brown and flop over. At that point, you'll want to pull them out of the ground, but leave those top stems attached. Then you're going to want to go through a process called curing for your onions to help them keep a little bit longer. Lay them out in a single layer in a dry, warm, well-ventilated place with those tops attached for about 2 to 3 weeks. Then you're going to want to cut the tops off the onions about 1 inch above the bulb and store in a well-ventilated place where there's some airflow between the onions. A lot of times you'll want to see them in a mesh bag or a nylon stocking or something that you can get airflow through the onions as they're being stored. You're not going to want to put the onions in a fridge, but somewhere in a nice, cool, dark place that's above 32 degrees is ideal for storage. Onion varieties like Copra, Candy, and Red Zeppelin, like we talked about before, can be stored for several months. However, the Walla Wallas that we're growing here will only be stored for a couple weeks.
The thicker the stem of the onion, the shorter the storage life of that onion. So this red onion here is going to have a shorter storage life than, say, this yellow onion, who has a thinner stem. This is the part where diseases and pathogens can tend to harbor and live. So the thinner and the narrower this part is, the more likely it's going to store for a little bit longer. As you go throughout your months after you've harvested the onions, you're going to want to check back regularly to make sure that none of them are rotten and that they do all have this nice papery outside to them. Once they get this shiny part to them, they aren't as protected as they are with this thin paper on the outside. So you want to make sure that they're covered with that at all times. And there's plenty of airflow through the place where you're storing those onions at. When we take a look at cutting our onions for our dishes, what you'll want to do is you'll want to take an end of the onion, typically it's the stem end, and you want to go ahead and take the knife and we'll just cut down on this part. So we've got our end of the onion and then the body of the onion. To make sure, to optimize and make sure that you don't start crying and those juices of the onion don't irritate your eyes, you want to make sure that you have a nice sharp knife to start with. Then we'll go ahead and cut that onion right down the center. And place it face down. So again, those juices aren't exposed to the air and get in your eye. Then you go ahead and take that other end off because that's not going to be needed. And then you want to go ahead and peel the paper off that onion. So this thicker part on the outside is not great for eating, so we'll want to go ahead and peel that off at this point and set that off to the side. Then you want to go through and put your hand on the onion and then go ahead and cut this way through the onion down towards the end. You want to do that 2 to 3 times depending on the size of your onion. And once you've done that, once you've gone through a couple times, then you'll go ahead and make your little cup here with your fingers and then go ahead and slice this way to dice those onions up. This really gives you the fewest cuts and gives you the fewest exposed edges so that you don't have all the juices from the onion getting exposed and getting into your eyes, making you cry. So then for this part of the onion, say today we're only going to use this half of the onion in our dish, then we're going to go ahead and wrap this in an airtight container, like a Tupperware plastic container, and go ahead and put that in there, and you can stick that in the fridge and it should stay good for about a week to 10 days. So you can use the rest of the onion.
Sometimes you'll cut into an onion and see that it started to sprout. This is perfectly fine. You can still use the onion. It's still good to eat. To help prevent it from sprouting while it's in storage, keep those temperatures low, somewhere between 33 and 40 degrees.
So thanks for joining us for Growing Onions 101. We hope this has been helpful for you. As always, feel free to reach out to our Dubuque County Extension Office if you have any questions while you're growing your onions, harvesting them, or preparing them for a meal. and enjoy the rest of your growing season. Thank you so much.